Chapter 691 Revealed by Hydesgrain. The more Jason thought about refusing to enter Kinra Island, the less likely he was to overcome the dangers that were bound to occur at any moment. It was because the Lands of Inheritances was a great opportunity for him, and evidently also for others. There were dangers on Kinra Island too, but that was only obvious because nobody would give up on their chance to enter the inheritance sites, while it was likely to be even more difficult to overcome the trials to obtain an inheritance. However, with the mythic essence cultivation technique, Jason knew that his combat prowess could increase tremendously, even if he wouldn't find or search for an inheritance. With that in mind, he knew that it shouldn't be too much of a difficulty to cultivate while simultaneously walking around with Jennifer, who could protect him. As such, rather than thinking about rejecting the City Lord's offer, Jason was slowly growing convinced that it was best to enter Kinra Island owing to the opportunities it presented, the fact that Jennifer would protect him, and that the mythic essence technique's worth was tremendous. Without dangers, there wouldn't be benefits because nothing was given to someone without expecting something in return. That was how a trade-off worked, and there were exceptions, but not many if one were to exclude master-disciple relationships where the master was nurturing the disciple without receiving anything particular in return. There may be some advantages one could make use of by having a disciple, but in the end, it was more of a burden to teach a disciple than anything else. Now, while staring straight into the City Lord's eyes, Jason felt that her earlier answer was genuine. As such, given the information and the fact that he shouldn't back off from doing something he wanted to, just because there were some dangers involved, Jason agreed to the City Lord's proposal only to ask. "You said, I have to answer one question if I want to use the mythic essence cultivation technique. Do you really think one question is worth lending me the strongest technique you have?" Jason's agreement caused the City Lord to sigh in relief, which was odd to see, only for her to come back to her senses a moment later before simply stating, "If it's possible for us to obtain an immortal eye, and for Jennifer to receive an inheritance, everything is worth it. I have already memorized everything about the mythic essence technique, so the manual itself doesn't hold the same importance to me as before. As for the question I have in mind, consider it as a bonus to my request to obtain the immortal eye, and the help you're supposed to provide Jennifer with." After saying this, the City Lord halted for a moment, only to finally ask the question she had on her mind for a long time. "Before leaving to cultivate, please answer the following questions. I know you have the human race's bloodline within you, but what race does the other bloodline within you belong to?" Hearing the question, Jason nodded his head. He had expected to hear this question or a similar one with the same answer sooner or later. As such, he was unfazed by the question and answered in all honesty. "My second bloodline is that of the Celestia race." The moment he said this, Luna's eyes widened before they turned angry as she asked disbelievingly, "Don't joke with me. How is that possible?" This was a reaction he didn't expect. Because of that, he could only look at the City Lord in confusion. "It's true though." He wanted to explain further, but before Jason could speak another word, the City Lord had already lifted her hand stopping him. "Instead of lying, you can simply say that you don't want to reveal your secret. I understand the dangers of unveiling the seemingly inconspicuous bloodline as it is the case for Jennifer, who also happens to be a halfling, but don't lie to me. Do you even know what you are saying right now? The Celestia race is not something you should mention so casually. You might think it is funny and just joke around right now, but if they were to hear what you were saying right now, your life would end faster than you think. If someone ever asks you what race you hail from, never say the same. The Celestia race is known for their purity, and they would eliminate everyone who tarnished their reputation, purity, and so on. A halfling of their race would be killed before he or she was even born." What the City Lord said caused goosebumps to erupt all over his body as he looked at her in doubt. If what the City Lord says is really the case, did my father try to protect me without letting even a single individual of the Celestia race know? And why did Whis believe me when I said I'm a Celestia if the City Lord's words are really true? More and more confusion spread through Jason's mind as he subconsciously mumbled his next thought out loud. Just what is the Celestia race? Will they really kill me once I encounter one of them? And can I even survive encountering them? Many thoughts rattled his brain as he began to ask himself about his heritage. The Celestia bloodline was extremely powerful, but it had created more problems for him than he could imagine. At the same time, the thought of venturing into Kinra Island became more exciting by the moment as Jason realized that he had to become much stronger, the faster, the better. While thousands of thoughts were flashing through Jason's mind, the City Lord looked at his expressions and his body language that depicted his confusion. She was angered that he'd lied to her without batting an eye, but after looking at the young man in front of her for some time, she felt that his reaction to her words was shocking. The way he reacted was not something one could easily face, even less because it seemed that Jason had no idea what or who the Celestia race truly was. Because of that, she couldn't help but calm down as a single, seemingly impossible thought manifested in her mind. Is it possible that he didn't lie? Only a moment after she thought this, Jason seemed to have regained his cool to some extent. I'm sorry to ask this, but where can I procure more information about the Celestia race? I encountered a few beings, but their knowledge about this race was shallow, and nobody was able to tell me more about them. What you said was the most I figured out until now, other than the fact that one can turn into an infernal Celestia if the emotions within them take over the rational Celestia's mind, controlling them, and corroding their mind. This question only caused Luna to be even more confused as she assumed that Jason never encountered his father. Maybe he really thinks that he is a Celestia, and doesn't know his real race. That assumption was the most likely thing to have happened in Luna's opinion. Thus, she took a deep breath before starting to explain to Jason everything she knew about the Celestia race. It was not much, but Jason listened intently to every word Luna spoke. She had calmed down and genuinely believed that Jason merely thought that he was a Celestia, but in reality, he wasn't. As such, she just told him everything she had heard about them, a long time ago. Less than 10 minutes passed before she was done because she didn't know much about them. But Jason's expression had brightened as he mumbled. Shima again, just what kind of planet is that? Chapter 692 Next Goal by Hydesgrain. Just what kind of planet is that? He mumbled, only to hear the City Lord's prompt answer. Shima is an infinitely large planet that is said to have been birthed by devouring an entire universe. Don't ask me how that works, I don't know that either. After that she halted for a moment, only to say, I can tell that you want to find out more about the Celestia race, but that's not useful for now. Cultivate and become strong enough to find out more about your true heritage. If you have more questions about the Celestia race, look for someone who has researched races, or someone who might know them. Jason noticed the way the City Lord said, true heritage, but he dropped the topic, not understanding why Luna didn't believe him. Little did he know that it was a perfectly normal reaction of her to act as she did, and it was more of Jason's obliviousness that was the issue. If someone asks me about my heritage, should I name a different race for the time being? He thus wondered, only to be unable to think of a race to mention. At that moment, Jason truly realized that his knowledge was very shallow about many things and he still had a lot to learn. However, without being able to fill the gaps in his knowledge right off the bat, Jason rather focused on increasing his strength. That was the most important for now, followed by procuring knowledge. Simultaneously, he would have to finish cleansing the dead mana vein in Spyro, preferably before it hatched. However, that was not much of an issue, and rather easy in comparison to increasing his strength to the extent he wanted it to reach. As such, he bid farewell to the City Lord, tightly grasping the Mythic Essence Cultivation Manual before leaving the main hall. In the past hour or so, many things had occurred, and he had learned and obtained many things. So, Kinra Island is my next goal. Jason was still oblivious to the City Lord's true goal, but instead of focusing on that, he decided to focus on himself, and the minuscule possibility that he might be able to procure an inheritance if he were to be extremely fortunate. The chance was small, but even if he wouldn't be fortunate enough, it didn't matter. To put it simply, Jason was already satisfied with the mythic essence technique, and very excited about the chance to procure smaller rewards if he were to enter an inheritance site with Jennifer, which would certainly happen. Because of that, he had to increase his strength to the highest possible degree, using every single second to cultivate efficiently. However, first of all, he had to fully memorize the first stage of the mythic essence technique. This took almost 2 weeks, but at the same time, Jason was able to take care of Spyro's dead mana veins, which were now fully expelled. As such, the Spiral Spirit was now using its fullest potential, even if its body had yet to recuperate from the damages it had obtained earlier. With 6 weeks left before they would depart, Jason could finally start cultivating with the mythic essence technique. Circulating a tremendous amount of mana through his mana vein as described, he started to cultivate and it felt as if they were on fire, but Jason endured everything without letting the slightest gasp escape his lips. Meanwhile, Petri and Solaris were using their own means to cultivate, trying not to fall behind Jason, whose cultivation speed accelerated drastically. Overcoming the pain, Jason's cultivation speed increased by more than 4 times, only for his proficiency in the first stage to increase slowly. He was still far away from reaching the peak of the first stage, but the results he'd already obtained were more than satisfying. As such, Jason grew immune to the pain as his mana core began to heat up owing to the rapid pace at which mana was circulated through his body. His entire mana had been divided into 6 streams that had to be controlled at the same time, while more and more mana was absorbed from the surrounding. With Petri, Solaris, and his own stigma fully unleashed, their effects increased as they overlapped, only for the Celestia aura to merge with the stigma's capacities, further elevating the mana circulation speed. Thus, Jason's cultivation speed was much higher compared to others at the same proficiency of the mythic essence technique. Nevertheless, he never slacked off and was fully focused on cultivating as if his life was on the line. That was, in fact, exactly the case because Jason knew that he had to reach the highest possible strength in order to survive on Kinra Island and not become a burden on Jennifer. Because of that, he couldn't reveal his entire joy when he attained the peak of the lick stage, liquefying the 10,000 highly compressed mana drops. Jason was happy, but at the same time, he knew that he shouldn't compare his present achievement to the standards of Argos anymore. Right now, he was on mana, and according to his age, he should have reached the peak of the Prisma stage already if one were to consider the cultivation technique he used and his talent. That was if he had been born on mana, which was, however, not the case. Considering that it had been around a year since he arrived on mana, Jason felt that he had achieved a lot. As such, there was no need for him to compare himself to others. Everyone had their own talent and prowess that gave them specific advantages or disadvantages. With that in mind, Jason focused solely on himself and his soul bonds that were working relentlessly, just like him. Spyro had hatched shortly before Jason had been able to reach the peak of the lick stage, which was great because the little Spiral Spirit could finally start absorbing Spirit Force without any issue, while simultaneously enhancing Jason's mind. The amplification from a Spiral Beast was different compared to the other 2 enhancements he received because only his brain and mind were affected. His mind felt as if it was on fire and then beaten to a pulp, the first time he received Spyro's enhancement. Afterward, the pain had drastically reduced, and it was negligible in face of the mythic essence cultivation technique's pain. However, what was definitely not negligible was Spyro's form. This was something that had overjoyed Jason because Spyro's true form was anything but a disadvantage, it was a formless spirit. As such, every form and shape could be used at any time, as if it was Spyro's true form. Jason found this to be exceptional, and the only slight disadvantage was that Spyro's cultivation base had to be high enough for it to make complex shapes. But that was only logical in Jason's opinion. While Spyro had finally hatched, Artemis was still evolving, and Petri had increased its physical strength at a rapid pace. Even if the basilisk was unable to use any technique, with enough pure and highly qualitative primordial energy around, it was impossible not to accelerate his cultivation speed. Jason didn't have any cultivation stones left to use, but oddly enough, both Jennifer and the City Lord had offered some extremely high-quality cultivation stones in all 3 varieties to him. Each was for one of his soul bonds, and Artemis was eager to devour the mana stones that could accelerate her evolution to a certain degree. Despite that, it would still take a long time for the evolution to be completed. Thus, Solaris was using the majority of mana stones, in order to accumulate enough mana to create the second solidified prismarine crystal. This was easier said than done because one had to accumulate energy, liquefy mana once again and then start the compression process. Despite the difficulties, nobody complained because the arduous part of cultivating would just start in the Prisma stage. With every cultivation stage, the complexity of work and the efforts one had to put in increased, and Jason was already eager to see how his future path would be, and where it would lead him. 2 months had passed, and they were about to depart to Kinra Island, which made Jason clench his fists as he felt his strength, glad about having accepted the City Lord's offer. Let's go. Chapter 693 Live Form by Hydesgrain. Emerging from a gigantic portal, Jason and the others arrived in the center of a bustling city. The smell of the ocean permeated the air, and Jason couldn't help but smile as he took in a deep breath. After he, Jennifer, and the cadets had gathered in the main hall, on the day of the departure, Luna brought them to the portal hall, where they selected one of the public open portals. As such, they emerged in the closest city to the area in which Kinra Island had emerged. Normally, the city wasn't as crowded as in recent days, which was all thanks to the news about the resurfaced lands of inheritances that turned it into a sort of tourist attraction in a matter of days. However, what Jason noticed almost immediately was the fact that there were not only Eos, Devas, and Manas, but also individuals from other races, and quite a few of them. Unable to hold back all powerhouses of other races, the 3 races that reigned Julindra region came to the consensus that it was best to allow a specific number of Spectre powerhouses to enter the region. They were labeled Embassy, but in fact, their only task was to bring a few prodigies of their race to Kinra Island. In order to prevent a war from breaking out, this had been a necessity, otherwise they would have faced a backlash and anger of more than 10 races who would have voiced out the disappointment. Due to the limited number of people allowed inside, Jason was not able to see many new races that were living on mana. Upon investigating their cultivation base, the unique traits, and whether they even had the possibility to awaken more than one cultivation vein, he swiftly determined the race's strength. It was just a rough guess about the entire race's strength, but he realized yet again that having more than one cultivation vein was rare. This cemented his initial assumption of their might since he had encountered the 3 races of the Julindra region. This was completely different to the Eos, Devas, and Manas, all of which had 2 cultivation veins, even if it was normal to awaken only one of them. As such, Jason could tell that the other races were taking these 3 races as a threat, even if the Manas were deemed as less significant than the Eos and Devas. Nevertheless, there were more than enough human powerhouses on mana, and it was only the majority of Manas that were too weak. At least, that was what they assumed to be, even if it was not the case. Jason knew that the Manas were extremely strong as long as they would try to adjust to their uniqueness while also switching the techniques they used, because the Devir and Eos races' techniques were not quite suitable for humans. Because of that, Jason thought that it might turn into an opportunity for the oppressed Manas to change their fate if they were to collide with other races from outside the Julindra region. It was not unlikely, and after giving it some more thought, Jason even felt that it had already happened. With that possibility in mind, the attack on the mana made both more and less sense than before. Jason was unable to comprehend the scheming behind the attack, but the same applied to what Luna was planning. He had been unable to figure out the use of the Immortal Eye in correlation with something that could help Luna achieve whatever she wanted to do with it. Even if he knew the answer, it wouldn't help him procure an Immortal Eye, because it was extremely difficult given his current strength. As such, Jason had begun to create a small priority list in his mind that had their survival as the first and foremost priority. This was only obvious, and the second was to remain unscathed. Following that, there were all kinds of things Jason wanted to achieve during the following months, but most of them were logical, such as advancing to the Prisma stage. He was not sure how long this would take with the Mythic Essence cultivation technique after it was enhanced with the usage of 3 stigmas and his Celestia aura, but it shouldn't be too long. If he were to solely focus on solidifying his first prismarine crystal, Jason assumed that it wouldn't even take an entire month. However, given his situation, Jason would be happy if he were to advance to the Prisma stage in 3 months. Nonetheless, their first task was now to leave the bustling city and travel through the ocean for several days straight. This was not a problem for Prisma stage beings, let alone everyone with wings, but Artemis was evolving, and he had yet to procure the capabilities to learn flying without wings. As such, he had to resort to using Solaris, with which Jason summoned seemingly ordinary wings. The flames he manifested were rigid, unmoving, and they looked exactly like black feathered wings. Solaris' control over its flame had increased tremendously, and as long as the wings didn't have a specific purpose such as attaining the highest possible speed, excluding flying, the little black origin flame was able to do everything. There were many things Jason would love to test out with Solaris, but as always, time was ticking, and he didn't have enough of it to do everything he wanted to. As such, Jason remained silent as he focused on everything he could while following Luna, Jennifer and the other cadets through the air. His flying speed was amongst the lowest, but Luna was not in a hurry. Instead, she wanted everyone to continue to try comprehending more about the techniques they were learning before she would take them back. This was not necessary for Jason because he had fully memorized the first stage of the Mythic Essence, and it would take him a long time to even come close to the second stage. Thus, Jason decided to use the following days to study the files about Kinra Island, the inheritances on top of it, before passively cultivating while moving around. Every cultivation technique could be utilized while being on the move, and in full concentration when one was seated on the ground. As such, Jason had also learned to use the Mythic Essence cultivation technique while moving around. This was a necessity, and extremely helpful to come one step closer to his target of advancing to the Prisma stage in a fully focused stage, ignoring all the noises or movements that would unnecessarily distract him as he followed Luna, who had erected a protective dome around everyone. The protection dome was a necessity because merely 3 days after they had departed from the bustling city, ravaging storms had begun to appear out of nowhere. These storms were by no means something beings below the Ascendian stage would survive. Even they would have difficulties in keeping themselves secure and not get torn apart, yet, Jason didn't notice any of that. Only when they arrived in the center of all the storms, did he regain his senses when he bumped into Jennifer, who had halted in her tracks, the moment they arrived in the calm center of the storm. Completing his cultivation, Jason rubbed his dry eyes before he began to look around, trying to evaluate the strength of the other beings that were filling the sky above Kinra Island. There was nothing special about most powerhouses, and even the prodigies were just stronger than ordinary beings but didn't have any unique traits to differentiate them from the others. At least Jason was unable to see them, but that was mostly the case owing to the concealment device they were using. It was similar to the one Jennifer was also using, and only if he were to insert more mana into his eyes, or approach the prodigies, would he be able to figure out more about their secret. However, he did no such thing because Jason was distracted the moment he looked at the ginormous island that was more like a small country. Yet, the size was not what distracted Jason, but something completely different, and he could barely stop himself from shouting out loud. What the hell, is the island alive? Chapter 694 Open by Hydesgrain. Staring in confusion at the gigantic island, Jason couldn't believe what his emperor eyes were indicating to him. Thinking that he was hallucinating, he rubbed them, expecting to see something different once he opened them once again. However, that didn't happen, and everything was exactly the same, which caused Jason to be utterly dumbfounded. Because of that, he didn't even notice that Jennifer and the others had already moved ahead, increasing the gap between him and themselves. Apparently, Kinra Island's barrier was still fully activated, preventing entry to anybody who tried to venture inside it. Thus, this time could be used to cultivate as one remained in the sky. Without realizing that the others had already gone farther ahead, Jason's entire mind was solely focused on the island as he subconsciously blurted out, "Is that a fucking tortoise?" Through the Emperor eyes, Jason was able to see many things, including energy currents, and the island in front of him was overflowing with it. However, this also included everything below the surface, which he was able to see clearly. As such, he saw a ginormous head of a tortoise more than 100 meters below the water surface, cultivation veins, and a large vessel that was visible to no one else. His accidental discovery caused Jason to be utterly dumbfounded, but before could continue looking at everything, he heard unfamiliar voices behind him. Turning around, he saw that Jennifer and the rest were not there anymore. Instead, there were powerhouses of a race he didn't know with the disciples that were talking to each other while throwing furtive glances at him once in a while. Their eyes appeared to mock him, and it was not difficult for Jason to visualize what they had been talking about. Nevertheless, he simply ignored it. Rather than taking their provocation to heart, Jason searched for his group and joined them. When Jennifer saw him, she couldn't help herself as she smiled lightly. "If you don't like being with our group, you can search for a new one." Her expression turned serious, but the tone suggested that she was teasing him. As such, Jason could only sigh, not sure what she intended to say. "Don't play around with me." After that, they continued to talk with each other, only for the cadets to join their conversation. They were tense, and upon seeing that both Jason and Jennifer were extremely calm, they relaxed visibly. None of them was sure how much time had passed, but it was nearing sunset when strong energy currents were released from Kinra Island. Following that, the barrier, which one could see through a partially transparent glamour, began to shine brighter, which made the prodigies scamper to hastily enter Kinra Island as quickly as possible. Jennifer and the other cadets were among them, and they began to approach the island the moment Luna wished them good luck, bidding them farewell. At that moment, Jason was instinctively dragged by Jennifer, only for her to notice what she was doing. Thus, she let go of his arm before acting as if nothing happened as she continued to walk towards the island. However, Jason's mind was elsewhere and not focused on the land of the inheritances, but on the being that carried the entire, gigantic island on its back. He was not even sure what kind of cultivation base the tortoise had because it was not possible for him to peer inside its vessel. Many things were concealed from him, including most of the things except the mammoth of the being he was diving towards. In fact, he was not even able to see the entire island because it was too gigantic, and it was fortunate that they had been in front of the unmoving tortoise. Jason was not sure whether it was hibernating, cultivating, or doing something else, but there should be a reason for it to emerge in the same area every few centuries. At that moment, he noticed something, which caused him to halt in his tracks for a moment. "Oh, I forgot to tell them that Kinra Island is a living being." Jason thought when he noticed that he could have told Luna, or Jennifer about what he had figured out. Unfortunately, it was already too late, but at the same time, it didn't make a huge difference whether someone knew about the identity of the island, or not to begin with. As such, he could only shrug his shoulders before he followed Jennifer and the cadets towards the island. The barrier that had opened a small pathway was exactly located above the tortoise's head. It slowly opened up like curtains that parted aside, increasing the space for the masses of people to squeeze through. However, that was exactly what caused the entire situation to become even more chaotic because everyone wanted to be the first to enter the lands of inheritances. He feared that a stampede would break out with the way people rushed forward thinking that they would be one step closer to procuring an inheritance because of that. Unfortunately, Jason knew better that it was not easy to procure an inheritance because he had studied the files he had received, to perfection. As such, the moment he appeared next to Jennifer, he suggested, "Once we're inside, Let's spend a few days to figure out the location of all exposed inheritance sites. It's useless to try entering just any of the structures without knowing whether the inheritance is suitable for us or not. It doesn't make a difference whether we enter the inheritance site earlier or later, to begin with. Everyone's starting point is the same. While Jennifer nodded her head, calming down from her earlier excitement, the cadet's opinion was different. They rushed inside the crowd of beings that wanted to enter Kinra Island quickly, ignoring Jason's comment. Unbothered by this, Jason was glad that at least Jennifer listened to him because he would be forced to follow her, otherwise. He wanted to ensure a certain degree of safety from being around her, after all. In the end, he was still too weak, which was obvious because his cultivation base had yet to advance to the Prisma stage. It wouldn't take long, and just several weeks, but he had to patiently wait for it to happen. However, even then, Jason knew that the average strength of those that entered Kinra Island was at the peak of the Prisma stage. At the same time, it was the limit at which beings could enter the gigantic island. Nevertheless, owing to the dangers looming inside the island, in addition to the fact that others were likely to attack each other, Jason was in need of Jennifer. At least for now, even if he didn't like it. Suddenly, just as the first beings had entered Kinra Island, he heard a familiar voice from behind, calling out his name. Jason! You are here too. Turning around, he saw a group of more than 10 manas, with Miranda, the young woman who had tricked him with the Eos race's 21st prince, standing in front of them, greeting him with a bright smile. Even if Jason had already forgiven the two for their prank at the biannual auction event in Lanro, he didn't like the fact that Miranda and the prince had tried to play around with him. As such, he greeted her unwillingly before showing signs of turning back towards the island's entrance. This was noticed by the Manries behind Miranda, who couldn't help but feel offended because Jason didn't pay any attention to them, treating them as if they were worthless. Because of that, one of the women amongst the group was about to lecture Jason, only to be held back by Miranda as she said, "Don't even try. It would be quite embarrassing to report to your family how a being at the peak lick stage was able to kill you." Chapter 695 Dangers by Hydesgrain. Don't even try. It would be quite embarrassing to report to your family of how a being at the peak lick stage was able to kill you. These words caused the woman to halt in her tracks as she stared at Miranda in confusion. "My lady, please don't joke with me like that. His mana fluctuations may be a little bit stronger than a being at the lick stage, but I'm at the peak of the Prisma stage. Please don't underestimate me." However, Miranda didn't seem bothered by that as she replied, "I want to build a good relationship with him. I feel like he will be able to gain something huge inside the lands of inheritances. If you attack him, don't even try to seek protection if he is more powerful than you imagine either." Hearing the seriousness in Miranda's voice, even the others who were similarly annoyed by Jason's arrogance couldn't help but look at their leader in doubt. Why is she thinking so highly of him? They wondered, not sure of what made Jason so unique. His looks were leagues above their own, and his combat prowess seemed to be higher than his cultivation base. Nevertheless, the only truly unique feature about the young man, whose back was facing him, was probably his golden eyes. His stigma and aura could not be detected by them because the stigma was deactivated while the Celestia aura was retracted. As such, Jason's true capabilities were hidden from oblivious beings, even if he didn't actively conceal his mana fluctuations. Because of that, the other manas were unable to understand why Miranda was exaggerating. However, Jason, who had heard her, only nodded his head, which was noticed by Miranda, before he and Jennifer approached the entrance of the island. They were flying slowly, without rushing to get inside. Instead, they were already looking at the large building through the barrier, trying to figure out which inheritance site they could start searching. Some buildings were just ruins without anything inside, while the inheritance sites were clear for them to see. At least, that was what everyone had initially thought. Little did they know that the desolate and destroyed remains of the buildings that looked like ruins were inheritance sites as well. Yet, entering them wasn't as easy as it looked like, and there were certain requirements one had to meet. Other than those ruins that had specific criteria to make someone eligible to enter them, there were also places one could only enter with a specific personality, which was interesting. At the same time, the latter requirement caused some beings to be enraged because there was a specific inheritance site that could only be entered by those who displayed chivalry. Said inheritance site gave extraordinary rewards, even if one were to be unable to obtain the entire inheritance. As such, everyone was eager to venture inside it, only to be unable to. Despite that, there was something else Jason and Jennifer were looking for. There were many unknown inheritances that had been untouched and hidden from the naked eye, but specific clues hinted at the requirements one had to meet. Because of that, Jennifer hoped that there was an inheritance that allowed her to make use of the 3 cultivation energies within her body. A specific inheritance site for beings that awoke all 3 cultivation paths would be the best, but neither Jason nor Jennifer had heard of such a place inside Kinra Island. Meanwhile, Jason was trying to help Jennifer figure out which inheritance sites they could see. However, he was distracted by the gigantic head of the tortoise, which made him look at it every now and then. When will I be able to bind a beast like that? He could only ask himself, with a glint of excitement in his eyes. Right now, Jason was not even able to figure out what kind of existence the tortoise truly was, let alone its cultivation base. Nevertheless, considering that not even the powerhouses at the Spectre stage didn't know that Kinra Island was, in fact, a living being, it had to be one of the strongest beings on Mana. At least, that was what Jason assumed, because beings at the Spectre stage were reigning small territories, while those ranked above should reign the lands. In the end, he could also be wrong, but that didn't really matter to Jason because his eyes were glued to the tremendous streams of mana that swept through the tortoise. It caused his entire body to be covered with goosebumps, which Jennifer noticed, only to follow his gaze. "Why are you looking at the water? Is there something that excites you?" she asked innocently, only to feel astonished about the bright smile on his face. Jason was visualizing how it would be to bind the gigantic island tortoise, but at the same time, he knew that his soul energy and soul crystal were too low to even dream of something like that. Furthermore, his body would be torn apart the moment he bound a being such as the tortoise below them. Hearing Jennifer's question, Jason regained his senses to some extent, which caused him to answer her honestly. "It's the tortoise." His voice sounded exciting, but Jennifer couldn't help but be confused. "Is he ill?" she asked herself, lifting her hand to touch his forehead, out of instinct. This move caused both of them to stiffen for a moment as Jason looked at Jennifer. The two couldn't help but stare into each other's eyes for a few moments before Jennifer retracted her hand quickly as she cleared her throat in embarrassment. "We should enter Kinra Island now," she thus said before flying closer to the entrance, where the initial crowd of beings had thinned, with the majority having entered the island. Jason just nodded his head and followed Jennifer with emotions surging within him which he had never felt before. "Am I becoming ill?" After reaching the entrance, it took them only half an hour before they were able to pass through the barrier. At that moment, dense energy currents swept through their body, invigorating them, and both couldn't help but feel excited. "Even without focusing on cultivating, I can enter the Prisma stage in no time owing to the density and purity of mana." While Jason prepared himself to enter the Prisma stage, Jennifer wanted to complete the preparations to be ready to advance to the Ascendian stage at any moment. She was unable to enter the Ascendian stage while being on Kinra Island, but it was still possible for her to prepare everything beforehand. Afterward, the advancement procedure would be less burdensome for her. As such, by simply entering Kinra Island, many things would become easier. Owing to the excitement they felt just by sensing the energy waves, both forgot about the incident that had happened only half an hour before. However, their excitement quickly evaporated because it was only 2 minutes later that they flew past the first inheritance site, which was in fact a large tower. Jason recalled the tower from the file Luna had given him, but that was not what caused both Jennifer and Jason to grow serious. In fact, What caused him to be alert was that they were able to see hundreds of peak Prisma stage beings fighting against each other. Not even an hour had passed since the barrier that led towards Kinra Island had opened, but the corpses of more than 10 beings were already lying on the ground. This clearly showed how dangerous Kinra Island was, and that was not because of the inheritance site's dangers, but other beings' greed. Chapter 696 Pulled by Hydesgrain. With dozens of beings fighting against each other right in front of the closest inheritance site, Jason couldn't help but shake his head. There were multiple inheritance sites in the vicinity, and it was said that there were a total of more than 100 inheritance sites in total. As such, Jason had no clue why they were already fighting. Instead of arguing and starting a bloodbath, they could have just chosen a different inheritance. It was not even as if the tower was the only inheritance site on the entire island, and there had to be many more extraordinary places waiting to be discovered. I guess that's the issue with inheritance sites that allow only a limited number of people inside, Jennifer said before turning away from the tower, looking out for other structures. Unfortunately, as expected, every inheritance site in the vicinity was besieged by dozens, if not more than 100 beings that wanted to enter them. This was perfectly normal in Jason's opinion, and Jennifer didn't seem to be shocked about it either. However, Jason was now even happier to have entered the island with Jennifer because he could determine that most beings that had succumbed to their ill fate were below the peak Prisma stage, or simply unfortunate. Can we look for a suitable inheritance site for me for a while and enter a different one if we don't find one that is perfectly compatible with me? Jennifer asked, to which Jason nodded. It was not like he had a choice, to begin with, but at the same time, he wanted to find an inheritance that was suitable for him too. From his understanding, the City Lord had received an inheritance, which had caused her eye color to change. He was not sure what the use of this was because Jason was unable to perceive anything special about her eyes. Nevertheless, he could tell that she had obtained the mythic essence technique from Kinra Island too. At least, that was what Jason comprehended after everything he had heard from Luna, in addition to the information written in the 2 files about the island. If that was not intriguing enough, Luna had also mentioned that she had been unable to procure an entire inheritance and that what she had received was just a fraction of it. As such, the rewards she had gained were not the best among the best. With that in mind, it was difficult for Jason to not be excited. Despite that, he tried to not be overly excited. Instead, he and Jennifer flew through the sky, looking around for all kinds of buildings and structures before approaching them. After that, they tried to figure out which inheritance it was and whether it was worth exploring further. Then they left quickly before anyone could follow and attack them. Even if Jennifer was confident in her strength, it was not necessary to offend anyone and fight every single person who tried to provoke them. Instead, it was best to hold back their strength and reveal it only when necessary. Through this, they had an additional surprise factor, which was what they should make use of to avoid conflicts to the max. Their well-thought strategy seemed to work as more than 3 days passed without anything special happening. While flying around, Jason focused on absorbing pure mana, while compressing the first few drops of liquefied mana. With a total of 10,000 drops of mana, the foundation to build the first solidified prismarine crystal was the most important. As such, the small crystal he started to construct had to be perfect. He didn't want to make a single mistake, which was the reason for him to take his time. Even if it was important to improve his strength quickly, creating a flawed crystal would only make everything worse. However, nothing would happen to his solidified prismarine crystal, because Jason was actively using his stigma, while summoning both Petri and Solaris, only to activate their stigma too. This allowed him to control his mana to an even higher extent, giving him an additional boost in accuracy, only to intertwine the Celestia aura within the depths of the prismarine crystal. Jason knew that this was not required, but his entire being told him that it would assist the creation process, further strengthening the degree to which the prismarine crystal would be solidified. Furthermore, he hoped that there would be an additional supportive factor, but that was not something Jason could be sure about. Due to the multiple supporting factors, Jason was able to prevent making rookie mistakes that were likely to happen during the solidification process. Hence, he was considered to be extremely fast at creating the outlines of the prismarine crystal, despite it being his first time doing something so complex. Yet, what Jason didn't realize was that the activated stigmas and his aura were influencing the solidified prismarine crystal. While his liquefied mana was already much denser and complex than ordinary mana, the influence of Jason's entire being that had an almost intractable sense of divinity was tremendous. Jason knew that the 3 activated stigmas were extremely helpful, and thus, he was using his soul bonds to their fullest extent, even if that meant they had to be outside the soul world. In his smallest form, Petri was still only 3 meters long and Solaris could take the size of his pinky fingertip. Only Spyro was not summoned, but that was because the little spirit was cultivating inside the soul world that had further been customized. At the same time, the spiral spirit didn't have a stigma, even if it looked like this would change soon. Jason was not sure how exactly stigmas worked, let alone his aura, but after Spyro had formed a connection to his soul, it was slowly changing. The provided soul energy and spirit force were merging together, changing something about the spiral spirit. Because of that, Jason assumed that it was the creation process of its stigma. Other than that, he was not sure what else was happening to Spyro right now. Meanwhile, as Jason cultivated, oblivious to the change he caused in the foundation of the prismarine crystal, Jennifer was focused on their surroundings, taking a look at all kinds of inheritances around them. Most of them were unknown to her, but before entering any of them, she wanted to figure out everything necessary about the island. This was because, entering them in most cases, would transport the entrant to a separate dimension where the trials would be held. The number of beings that had entered Kinra Island was in thousands, and it was gradually increasing. Now that 3 days had passed, the majority of beings had already entered their first inheritance site, but there were many like Jason and her, trying to find a perfect inheritance for the unique situation and constitution. As such, they had often encountered others that were looking at him, or to be precise at Jason, because a black snake was coiled around his chest. Simultaneously, the activated stigmas and the fully unleashed Celestia aura also attracted some attention before they left Jennifer and Jason on their own. They might be interested in Jason, but that didn't mean that they would waste their precious time observing him. Suddenly, she felt something weird around her, which caused Jennifer to slow down. Because of that, Jason bumped into her, only to lift his head, where he saw that she was looking straight in a specific direction as she mumbled, "That way." She hadn't even realized that Jason had bumped into her, and began flying in the direction in which she sensed something. It made her feel like she was pulled towards the direction of an invisible magnet, and another day passed before they had crossed a large distance. Only then did Jennifer stop, looking at a small temple below them that looked like plants had overtaken it, sprouting through every nook and cranny, nearly making it invisible to be spotted from afar. This caused Jason to look at the ruins, where he could see faint currents of all the cultivation energies. Lifting his head, once again, he looked at Jennifer, whose eyes were glued to the temple as he mumbled, "Is that it?" Chapter 697 Prismar by Hydesgrain. Drawn towards the temple that was overgrown with the surrounding plants, Jennifer approached it slowly without even realizing the same. The closer she came, the stronger the pull became, and it was the moment she was right above the temple that she noticed a portal close to the entrance. This made her turn towards Jason, who had followed her quietly. "I think that's the inheritance site I want to enter." There is only one problem. She had been excited about the inheritance site, only to realize that Jason was still with her. She had to protect him, but that wouldn't work if her instincts about only those with 3 cultivation energies being able to enter the temple including her were to be true. The moment Jason saw the temple, he realized that it hadn't been used for a very long time, which meant that not many beings had managed to enter it. At the same time, the fact that Jennifer was pulled towards it, indicated that she was perfectly suitable for the inheritance. If one was pulled towards a specific inheritance site, it was said that one was not only perfectly suitable for the final inheritance but also highly likely to pass all trials, as long as no unforeseen event happened. There were many beings that were suitable for specific inheritances, but in the end, most wouldn't survive the trial's dangers. As such, Jason knew that Jennifer had to enter the temple inheritance site. "I won't be able to enter it with you, I think," he simply guessed, to which Jennifer nodded her head in uncertainty. Initially, Jason would have found this annoying, but instead of acting up, he just nodded his head. "I will be fine. If I cannot follow you, I should just cultivate, and advance to the Prisma stage. Afterward, I will be able to take care of myself." Jason was not sure how true this was, but he didn't want to hold Jennifer back. As such, he just said that he would be fine without her around him. That didn't have to be true, but there was something he had up his sleeves, allowing him to take care of a few nuisances. Due to this, he was prepared to venture out alone, at least to a certain extent. Jennifer noticed that Jason was confident in himself, which eased her mind as she spoke in a faint voice. "Thank you." Afterward, she slowly approached the portal, and reached for it, brushing her fingers across it without showing any hesitation. "She is really restless about the inheritance, that's something new," Jason thought as he saw how Jennifer reacted and disappeared inside the portal before he could even wish her good luck. She didn't even take a single backward glance, which caused Jason to sigh before he approached the portal as well. Yet, the moment he touched it, the portal repelled him as he had already expected. This caused him to issue another sigh before he took a look at the temple's inside. "There is a concealment, that's great." The entire temple was concealed, which originated from the material out of which it was constructed. Jason had never seen stones like that before, but they allowed the three cultivation energies to enter the temple even through them, which was strictly one way. The walls prevented them from leaving. This was interesting and extremely useful for Jason, who wanted to stay inside the temple, so as to conceal his energy ripples and avoid unnecessary conflicts if someone were to find him all by himself. He might be unable to enter the inheritance site inside the temple, but the temple itself was accessible. Thankful for the opportunity, he momentarily even forgot that he was now alone if one were to exclude his soul bonds. Petri and Solaris were still clinging to his body, while Spyro was cultivating inside the soul world. Artemis' evolution was also progressing, at a slow, yet steady pace. Jason was not sure how many months it would take her to finish the entire evolution, but it would be great if it would be over before his time inside Kinra Island would end. That had many reasons, but the most important one was that his gut feeling told him that he would be in a dire need of her by then. He was also not sure how long the tortoise would hibernate, but Luna had told him that the island would remain at the same location for a duration between 6 months and an entire year. As such, he had quite some time to cultivate and possibly even to find his own inheritance. Because he was weaker than Jennifer, his main focus wouldn't be the immortal eye. Instead, Jennifer could look for it. After all, she was her disciple. He might have received an extremely powerful cultivation technique, but that didn't mean he would have to act even more reckless than he already did by entering Kinra Island while being at the lick stage. In the end, that could already be considered a life-threatening action, with an extremely high death rate. It was almost suicidal, if Jason were to be honest to himself. Fortunately, this would change soon because Jason focused on cultivating the moment he entered the basement of the temple. Seated on the ground, Jason greedily absorbed the mana that was unable to escape the temple and used it to empower the creation of the first solidified prismarine crystal. There were not many things he had to do in order to solidify a prismarine crystal, but it was deemed as extremely complex. However, using the 3 stigma and his Celestia aura to support the solidification process, the complex mechanisms seemed to vanish. Everything went smoothly, and there was not even a single issue Jason encountered. Normally, it was said that the creation of the first solidified prismarine crystal was the most difficult because many made small rookie mistakes, forcing them to disintegrate the flawed product once again. This would force them to stay at the peak of the Lick stage before they had replenished the used-up mana drops. Fortunately, nothing of that happened to Jason, and he was able to create his first prismarine crystal, only 1 month later. He did everything slowly, focusing on the smallest details, while his stigma and aura were intertwining with the final product, seemingly strengthening it. The faint traces of his father's divinity that had been annexed and merged with his own body influenced the creation of the solidified prismarine crystal. Through this, it became firmer, and he was able to further increase the circulation speed of mana. But most importantly, it was more effective and stronger than a normal prismarine crystal by around 4 times. When Jason noticed this, he was shocked because he had expected the solidified prismarine crystal to be only 3 times stronger than the norm. That was solely based on the strength of his unique mana drops that required thrice the mana to be compressed into a single drop. Never could he have imagined that the divinity that swept through his body, which Jason had never really noticed, was the cause of all of this. Meanwhile, Solaris was about to create its second prismarine crystal, and Petri had entered the 9th Lick stage. During the last month, even Spyro had almost created its stigma, using enormous amounts of soul energy and spirit force. Meanwhile, what Jason didn't realize either, was that many things happened on the outside of the temple, and even inside. He had been in a fully focused state, and owing to that, he hadn't even noticed the temple's reaction to his advancement to the Prisma stage. To Jason, the advancement hadn't been anything special, and only the end result shocked him extremely. Because of his ignorance, he couldn't even understand that he was the reason for what was about to happen at any moment. As if on cue, the entire temple began to shake, the moment Jason advanced to the Prisma stage. His Celestia aura was fully unleashed, enveloping him tightly, indicating the emergence of a new being at the Prisma stage. Just as the temple shook, Jason released something that caused his vibrant eyes to bulge as he lifted his head, facing the temple inheritance's portal. Am I being pulled towards it? Chapter 698 Threat by Hydesgrain. Am I being pulled towards it? Jason mumbled the moment he felt a strong suction force from the portal that was less than 50 meters above him. However, only a moment later, Jason noticed that his assumption was not exactly correct. He was pulled towards the portal right in front of him, but at the same time, Jason felt that his body was drawn in every single direction. Because of that, he couldn't help but feel astonished as he wondered whether his mind was playing tricks on him, or if his thought was correct. Am I being pulled towards all inheritances and not just one? This shouldn't be the case because the majority of inheritances were not suitable to him, and Jason was completely aware of this. Nevertheless, what he felt was neither an illusion nor a trick. As such, instead of wondering if he was truly pulled towards all inheritances, Jason asked himself why this should be the case. Is it because of my aura or the fact that I advanced to the Prisma stage? The latter seemed to be wrong, but the former was not exactly a reason that should allow him to enter all kinds of inheritance sites either. Unfortunately, the 2 reasons he had named were the only things that had happened during the entire month that had been deadly silent in all other respects. In the end, the Celestia aura was the most reasonable answer he could come up with, and Jason began to wonder how his presence had been noticed. During my advancement, the Celestia aura shouldn't have been strong enough to envelop the entire island. That would be madness. Does that mean that all inheritances are somehow connected and that my aura reaches every single inheritance site? Right now, Jason was simply trying to join the dots, but nothing really made sense. As such, he could only stop making assumptions for now. Instead, Jason approached the surface, as the bright sun shone on his fair skin. Looking around, he saw that not a single living being was in the vicinity, which was more confusing than reassuring. However, instead of worrying about it, Jason grew eager to test how it was possible to fly at the Prisma stage, without the use of wings. That was a privilege of beings at the Prisma stage, and Jason wanted to make use of it. With that thought in mind, he didn't use his wings and tried to follow the instructions he had been given some time ago. Jennifer said that the solidified prismarine crystal can be utilized to negate the gravitational force to some extent, so how am I going to do that? Thanks to the information he had been provided by Jennifer during the last few days before she entered the portal, it didn't take long for Jason to figure out how flying without wings worked. His speed was not extraordinarily fast, but much faster than others who had the same cultivation base as him. That was owing to his unique prismarine crystal that was intertwined with golden and silver strands. Nevertheless, he was still slower than with the use of Artemis or Solaris wings. As such, he returned to the temple before looking at the portal. If I'm drawn towards the portal, I should be able to enter it, but is that really what I want to do? Jason mumbled quietly while staring at the portal. Once he entered, there was no way that he would be able to return easily. As such, it was necessary for him to pass a few trials beforehand. Thus, he would have to make a thorough decision because it was possible that some trials would take up too much of his time. Even if he had told Luna that he would follow Jennifer, he was also slightly egoistic and wanted to find an inheritance for himself too. Nevertheless, he could tell that Jennifer was more important to him than just any inheritance. This realization caused Jason to ask himself since when had his thoughts about the young woman changed to this. Is she already as important as my late masters had been to me? He wondered, only to smile sadly at the thought of Shane and Dahlia. Nevertheless, he noticed that he couldn't answer the question because he was not sure how much he cared about Jennifer. Such thoughts were never something he had bothered about before. As such, they were new and completely unfamiliar to him. However, before he was able to continue thinking about Jennifer, or the fact that it might be safer for him to follow her, multiple things happened at the same time. First, at the thought of Jennifer, he got a bad feeling, and sensing something behind him, he instinctively turned around, only to see a total of 4 individuals that approached the temple inheritance. What the hell are those? Jason almost exclaimed as he saw 4 humanoid beings that had all awakened 3 cultivation veins. Seeing this, he felt jealous for a short moment, only to realize that he had no time to waste. Never in his life would he ignore a premonition, and both the thought of Jennifer and the 4 individuals he saw through the walls owing to his emperor eyes, made him have a premonition. Despite that, he didn't immediately enter the portal of the temple inheritance. Instead, he retracted his mana fluctuations, the Celestia aura, and stigma, while Petri and Solaris were forced to return to the soul world. Sensing Jason's emotional chaos, they didn't even try to resist, knowing that it would only enrage Jason. With his entire being concealed, Jason couldn't be found if nobody was actively searching for him. However, his assumption was proved incorrect as the 4 individuals who were all at the peak of the Prisma stage had just entered the temple, the moment Jason hid behind a big pillar. A hue filled with a raging fury could be seen around all 4 beings, which told Jason that he shouldn't offend them if possible. They were noticeably enraged, which he could not only see according to the hue but also their conversation that reverberated through the entire temple. It took quite a while before this fucking tortoise resurfaced, but why does it have to be in such a weird area? Without the help of our ancestors, we would have never found it. One of the beings said, using a unique sound in between his speech. Don't complain, idiot. Let's retrieve everything Traitor Ken stole and return to our origin planet. This place is not good for us. It's just a waste of time. A second voice said, only for the third being to nod his head. I agree, let's finish everything as quickly as possible. If we wouldn't have been punished for accidentally killing a few prodigies at the Michelda gathering, there is no way we would be here, right? Sighing deeply, the third being seemed to feel as if they had been punished for no credible reason. However, a fourth voice that sounded extremely arrogant resounded in the temple as he remarked. Who told these idiots to be so weak? They should have known that offending us won't do them any good. That's what they get for underestimating us, preactors. When Jason heard all of this, he was confused, but at the same time, he knew that Jennifer was in danger, which caused him to nervously bite his lower lip. Chapter 699 First Trial by Hydesgrain. The Preactor race, which was the name Jason assumed him to have, was extremely weird. What he was able to see through the pillar using his Emperor eyes was more than enough for him to be astonished, but that only increased as he took a peek, the moment they entered the portal. All four of them had grayish skin, necks that were more than 30 centimeters long, sharp teeth, a flat nose, their back was covered with scales, but the most important aspect was their seemingly endless anger, and 3 activated cultivation veins. Based on what he had overheard, Jason was able to figure out that the inheritance came from the Preactor race, or to be precise someone who had betrayed them. At the same time, it hadn't been difficult to tell that the 4 Preactors were prodigies, and underestimated because of their age. Adding it to the fact that they didn't seem to like Mana, or Kinra Island, he concluded that their race must be extremely strong. They had been talking about their origin planet and how it was better to stay there. As such, Jason comprehended that their home planet was better for them to cultivate. A punishment of entering an inheritance site was something Jason had never heard, but based on the Preactor's confidence, he could easily tell that they didn't consider anything about the inheritance site as dangerous. This was not good, and Jason became only more worried about Jennifer. Unfortunately, he didn't know whether the first trial inside the inheritance site threw all participants in one area, or if it was a trial one had to solve alone. With that unknown factor in mind, Jason had to wait for some time before he rushed to the portal, ignoring the minuscule possibility that the pulling force he felt was just an illusion. Believing his body, Jason rushed through the portal, only to feel the familiar sensation of being teleported to a different location. Surrounded by darkness that was pierced through by bright shining stars, Jason could only hope that Jennifer had already passed a few trials, otherwise, everything would become extremely burdensome. Suddenly, he heard a robotic voice inside his head, originating from the trials. Welcome to the legacy trials of the Supreme Magician. Requirement of owning all 3 cultivation veins has not been met. Instead, unique requirement has been met. Welcome youngling of the primordials. Prisma Stage 1 Small, highly compressed, prismarine crystal detected. Level of difficulty, adjusted. The multitude of messages overlapped inside his mind, and Jason could barely decipher them by guessing what he was supposed to make of it. He didn't know what primordials had to do with him, but Jason simply wanted to connect that with the fact that he was half Celestia. However, it could also have something to do with primal humans. Because of that, he was not sure where to put primordial in the evolutionary cycle of humans. In the end, what was more important was that he was able to enter the inheritance site, or legacy trials, which was the name the robotic voice gave to the place he was just about to enter. The difficulty of his missions was tweaked, which was good to know. As such, he might be able to use his high strength to pass the trials in a flash. Unfortunately, it was not as easy as he was hoping for. In fact, Jason had yet to realize that certain trials were bound to be more difficult than he could have ever expected. He was not sure how much time had passed, but when he emerged on the other side of the portal, Jason found himself in the middle of a lush forest that had dense vegetation consisting of a variety of plants. Trial 1. Defeat all beasts below the mid-first threshold of the Prisma stage, 72 hours left. The robotic voice resounded in his mind again, but instead of thinking about the mission, Jason wondered where the voice came from. There was no thread of energy that led towards him or anything like that, and it was just the voice inside his head. It felt weird, but Jason could tell that the voice meant him no harm. Because of that, he was able to calm down really quickly. Taking a look around, the Emperor eyes inspected his entire surroundings at a glance. This gave him the opportunity to figure out whether there were any dangers around him or not. Fortunately, there was no strong beast in his immediate surroundings, giving Jason some time to figure out what he had to do. I have 3 days to kill every beast with less than 4 solidified prismarine crystals. However, this also means that there are stronger beasts. Jason quickly concluded the mission's details, with the most important aspect being that there were stronger beasts in his surroundings. As such, he had to pay attention to the beasts he encountered. Nevertheless, he didn't even think of taking it slow because he had to meet Jennifer as quickly as possible. She had a head start of an entire month, which was good because it would take some time before Jennifer would encounter the Preactors, but at the same time, it was annoying because Jason had to charge up to her. First, I shall find out what and how many beasts are there in my surroundings, and how large the space around me is. Jason didn't believe that he was on an ordinary planet right now, otherwise, it wouldn't make sense for him to be asked to defeat all beasts. As such, he had to be in a secret realm or a restricted zone in which he had to defeat the beasts. Thus, Jason exerted the floating sky technique before he rushed through the lush forest, which had dense foliage that didn't even let sun rays pass through it and touch the ground. It was only at the moment he began to run that he noticed how much stronger he had become. Before, he hadn't felt a big difference, but through the solidified prismarine crystal, many things about his mana control and circulation had changed, let alone the fact that his entire being had been enhanced. Earlier, the 10,000 highly compressed liquefied drops of mana were equal to 30,000 common liquefied drops of mana. Meanwhile, a normal solidified prismarine crystal was equivalent to 25,000 drops of liquefied mana. However, now after Jason had advanced to the Prisma stage, solidifying his highly compressed liquefied drops of mana, the special prismarine crystal he had was equivalent to the strength of more than 100,000 drops of normal compressed liquefied mana drops. Adding his soul bond's amplification that was almost negligible in face of the insanely high amount of strength he had acquired, Jason couldn't help but feel amazing as he rushed through the forest. Ignoring the beasts he passed, Jason simply tried to increase his speed to the highest possible as he released his Celestia aura and stigma, improving the floating sky movement technique's efficiency. Through this, only a few hours passed before he was done inspecting the entire dome-like space he had entered. So, it's like that. Jason thought with a scheming smile on his face as he returned to the center of the dome. Without truly caring about the dangers he brought forward, he set the entire forest on fire as he threw fingertip-sized flames in all directions. He knew the position of all beasts that had 4 or even 5 prismarine crystals, but Jason was not really fazed by them. As long as he gave his utmost efforts, he was confident of being able to defeat them. Thus, no beast inside the restricted space was strong enough to face him head-on. At least that was what he expected, ignoring the important factor that beasts were also beings that could have unique traits and abilities. Chapter 700 Fused Beast by Hydesgrain. Burning down the forest was only a good decision as long as he was confident in defeating all kinds of opponents inside the small space he found himself in. Fortunately, that was the case, and Jason was eager to finish the first trial quickly. Using his Emperor eyes, he had been able to figure out the vast majority of the inhabiting beast's strong traits, even without intently looking at them. Thus, only a few hours had passed before the vast majority of the forest was reduced to ashes. Yet, at the same time, Jason hadn't remained idle. Rather, he had already initiated his attack, killing hundreds of beasts. With his extraordinary strength, he looked unstoppable, and he didn't face many issues with his prismarine crystal, his soul bond's amplification, and multiple more factors that increased his strength further. Every single cell in his body was surging with seemingly endless power, and Jason didn't even notice that he was tirelessly attacking the beasts, without paying any attention whatsoever to the kind of beast he was fighting. Adrenaline was kicking in coupled with the addicting sensation of being able to overwhelm opponents he had been unable to kill, or even injure before. Thus, the more he fought, the broader his smile became. At least until he reached a cavern entrance, from which a purple-winged wolf emerged followed by 2 more wolves that looked exactly the same. 3 meters tall, purple feathered wings, and lightning spreading through their fur. Yet, the moment they saw Jason, whose Celestia aura and stigma were already fully unleashed, every single strand of their hair erected. Before, Jason would have just attacked them recklessly, but he got a bad feeling about the winged lightning wolves. The largest one amongst them was 4 meters in height, and through the Emperor eyes, Jason could clearly determine that it was a mutation. Owing to this mutation, it was innately stronger than the rest, but at the same time, he was able to clearly see something unique within the mutated wolf. Its constitution was different compared to the other two wolves, but it was quite different to his late masters, or anyone else he had encountered with unique constitutions. Rather, it was something that seemed to be connected to the other two wolves. The moment the large wolf saw Jason, it howled out, while releasing strong mana currents. All three wolves had 3 prismarine crystals within their mana core. As such, they were weaker than him, because his prismarine crystal had the strength of 4 normal ones. Nevertheless, he didn't attack immediately because the mutation his eyes perceived caused him to halt in his tracks. However, this brief pause led him to lose his upper hand. Unfortunately, Jason noticed this too late, and the moment the mutated wolf's body began to glow in a faint light, he saw something that shocked him greatly. At the same time, it made him act instinctively as he summoned Byakuya and Solaris. Simultaneously, Petri entered his mana core, before his reptilian eyes and stigma were fused with Jason. What Jason saw was in fact a fusion between the winged lightning wolves. The moment the other wolf touched the body of the mutated wolf, they began to merge, enlarging in size while the head and tails grew out of the mutated wolf's body. That was shocking because Jason had never expected something like that to happen, even less because the fused wolf now had 2 pairs of heads, tails, wings, and mana cores. While the fusion between the 2 wolves had started, the third wolf was just about to join the fray. However, Jason, who had already acted instinctively, had emerged in front of it, slashing out with Byakuya that was enveloped in a thick layer of Solaris flames. The moment Jason acted, his own fusion that took less than a second had been completed, allowing him to activate 2 stigmas at the same time. Other than that, he had fully released the Celestia aura, further increasing his mana circulation speed. As such, after activating the perfect mastery floating sky movement technique, Jason didn't even need a full second to reach the lone wolf that didn't expect the young human to react so quickly. Jason's speed was a shocker, owing to which the third wolf was unable to erect its defenses properly. Thus, Jason could easily slash at the winged lightning wolf, forcing it to retreat. It had to release a tremendous amount of mana, which it used to conjure lightning around it. With that, it could accelerate faster and to a much higher limit. Unfortunately, Jason was still faster than the wolf, and the race-specific weakening curse followed by the petrification and abyssal curse were all much stronger than they had been before he advanced to the Prisma stage. As such, he weakened and paralyzed the retreating beast easily with the help of the 3 curses. Thus, his overall might had increased to a high level, and his agility helped him end the third winged lightning wolf's miserable life without hesitation, beheading it mercilessly. A fountain of blood gushed out of the severed neck, giving him the chance to turn around, finally facing the fused beast whose fusion was probably still underway. However, contrary to his expectations, it had just finished fusing, only to realize that its brethren had been killed. Enraged by this, it had already appeared in front of Jason, with a much higher velocity than he expected. There were only 2 mana cores, with each having 3 solidified crystals inside, but Jason felt that they were not added together, but it was as if they were multiplied with each other. Shocked by the beast's pace, he could barely lift Byakuya in order to deflect the claw that was ripping through the air, intending to kill him. When they collided, Jason was not even able to continue standing and was swept off his feet. As such, he was flung through the air, where he crashed into the ground more than a dozen meters away. However, instead of lying on the ground, Jason had already manifested Petri's tail, through which he had pushed himself up from the ground without the need to use his hands to get back on his feet. This allowed him to witness the winged 2-headed lightning wolf's pace with which it appeared in front of him. "It is slower than I first thought," Jason suddenly noticed, giving him the chance to use Solaris in addition to the previous factors in order to increase his speed once again. With flames bursting out from behind Jason, he was propelled forward, allowing him to evade the wolf's subsequent attacks by a hair's breadth before he had finally adjusted to the weird sensation. his body was still not accustomed to being several times stronger than before. Even the last dozens of fights hadn't been enough to help him adapt. As such, he was overjoyed to fight a powerful opponent against which he had to give his utmost efforts to even survive. It was insane, but that was exactly the thought that flashed through Jason's mind as a bright smile emerged on his face the moment he used the combination of his curses and the abyssal effect to target the wolf with it. Through this, the dance of life and death of two powerful, fused beings had begun, shaking the small space in which they wreaked havoc.